Bonjour, Kinamagi Nene, Ireland Indigenicas, and welcome to this production of Social Studies Explorer. Today's episode, Chapter 7, Section 2, The Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation would be our nation's first attempt at a government to unite us. So let's begin with the introductory video provided by Michigan Open Book.
Welcome to my movie. Before the Constitution, there were the Articles of Confederation. It was in fact the first Constitution of the United States. It was written in 1777 by the same people that passed the Declaration of Independence. The Articles established friendship and cooperation among the 13 colonies. The Articles were created during the Revolutionary War. They were written to avoid a strong central government. The Articles placed the majority of the power with the individual states. During this period of our history, there were actually 13 territories. The 13 colonies were the 13 British colonies in North America, separately chartered and governed, that signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and formally broke with the Kingdom of Great Britain, leading to the American Revolutionary War. Under the Articles, each of the states retained their freedom. Each state sent a representative. These individuals made up a group called the Congress. The Congress voted on laws and rules for the running of the country. The Congress was responsible for conducting businesses with foreign countries like France, and an important ally during this time period, declaring war, maintaining an army and navy, but the Articles denied Congress the power to collect taxes, regulate interstate commerce, and enforce laws. A man named Daniel Shays organized farmers throughout New England to protest laws that increased taxes and demanded immediate debt repayment. When the state refused to respond, Shays and his armed followers closed the courts in western Massachusetts in protest of foreclosed properties. The rebellion came to a head when Shays was defeated while trying to seize a federal arsenal of weapons in Springfield, Massachusetts, on January 25, 1787. This rebellion demonstrated the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and convinced many states of a need for a stronger central government. Delegates from all the states except Rhode Island met in Philadelphia to discuss the revising of the Articles of Confederation. There were some disagreements between the states on what should be included inside the Constitution. Eventually they came to a compromise. This became known as the Great Compromise, and it was a new government. The first couple years of this government, people were convinced that they had finally made a government that worked. It was more organized, more fair, and it made life for this new country much happier. Could you imagine if there was never the decision to recreate the Articles? Would we have the rights that we have today? The Articles in the Constitution were very different and both had their sides of advantages and disadvantages. But the Constitution was a government that would stand strong, a government that would be looked upon by other countries, a government with freedom and rights to all, a government that still stands today.
So let's read about this Articles of Confederation. It's hard to imagine that the United States without a national government. That's how our country began. While the War of Independence was being fought against Britain, the colonists were using the Declaration of Independence to establish smaller state governments with their legislators, governors, and their own constitutions. In 1777, the Continental Congress proposed a plan for a new government called the Articles of Confederation. This plan was ratified in 1781. A confederation is a group of states that become united for one or more reasons. In the document, the new government called itself a League of Friendship. It provided for a central government that was weaker than the state governments. This led to problems and arguments between and among the new states. The colonists did not want a strong central government because of their experience with the unlimited power of under British rule and the king. Because of this fear, the Articles of Confederation were written and ratified as a national government as long as power was limited. It was set up as a republic, or a system where people elect representatives to run the country. In a republican system of government, birthright or heredity do not decide who leads or rules the country. Instead, the new republic was based on the core democratic value of popular sovereignty, which meant the people held the power. The people elected representatives to make decisions for the running of the government, maintaining everyone's voice as they served the people. If the representatives didn't listen to the people, they would be voted out of office. Articles of Confederation, the first national government. As this new American government began, the Articles of Confederation began to grow. There were some advantages, but there were many more disadvantages. The new government consisted of all 13 states. The Continental Congress sent delegates to the government, and each state had one vote. To pass major laws needed 9 of the 13 states to agree. There was neither a king nor a president. The Confederation lasted 8 years, from 1781 to 1789. It was an uncommon government for its time because it had a written constitution and no ruler. That in itself was a new idea. The 13 states had loose ties under the Articles of Confederation, but in general, each state ruled itself. There was a Congress where each state had one vote. There was a president of Congress, John Hanson, who led that group. And you may see this occasionally on trivia about how many presidents there were. There were presidents of the Congress. And some people do count them, but we don't count them as far as naming and numbering our presidents today. But there was no president in an executive branch to enforce the decisions made by Congress. And there were no national courts to interpret the laws. Congress had limited powers. It could declare war, make treaties, settle serious disagreements between states. It did not have the power to tax the people. It could ask the states for money to pay national debts, but it could not force the states to pay. And many states did not pay, which you can see immediately will be a problem. If we all go in and order pizza and half of us refuse to pay, then who pays for it? The half of us who actually paid. And that quickly is going to create some animosity. I mean, who wants to have to pay for everyone else's pizza and they never chip in? Congress could pass a law if 9 of the 13 states agreed, but it had no power over the state or its citizens to enforce the laws. The new Congress could print money, but so could each state. And as far as the national defense, Congress could not raise an army without permission from the states. And it mentions a potential small group activity, but we're not going to focus on that today. Although if you do check out a Google search Articles of Confederation and PPPST, which is Pete's PowerPoint station, you're welcome to kind of check that out. So some weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation: a weak national government. Congress could not tax or regulate commerce among states. There was no common currency, and currency is another word for money. Just one vote per state, size didn't matter, which is still how the Senate works, even though it's 2 votes. And no executive or judicial branch. The land north of the Ohio River Valley was called the Northwest Territory. That would include states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio is the key ones there. In 1787, the Northwest Ordinance set a plan for the new states to form and join the Union. The new states had freedom of religion, the right to a fair trial, but could not own slaves. Despite the fact that Northwest Ordinance set up a governing plan for the new territory and the formation of new states to the Union, the Articles of Confederation were not the best plan for the new nation. And that would be exemplified by Shays' Rebellion. After the Revolutionary War, many Americans could not pay their bills unless they had gold. Most farmers borrowed money to farm and pay taxes. Many could not pay their debts and went to jail or lost their farms. Many of these farmers were Revolutionary War veterans who were never paid for their service. The farmers in Massachusetts started a rebellion against their state government because they could not get a fair price for their crops. Their leader was Daniel Shays, a Revolutionary War captain. He asked the Massachusetts government to, quote, go easy on the farmers until they could pay their debts. When the state government ignored his request, his troops conducted raids all over the state. Since there was no national assistance, the Massachusetts state government had to put down the rebellion alone. Shays' Rebellion showed the leaders of the new states that they needed a stronger national government than what was provided for by the Articles of Confederation. By 1787, many leaders feared that the new country would fall apart without a stronger central government. They called for a meeting of delegates from all the states. The goal of this Second Continental Congress was to make changes to improve the Articles of Confederation. But once the delegates had gathered in Philadelphia, they realized that a bigger change was needed. They wrote a brand new document called the Constitution of the United States, and it became the supreme law of the land, then and now. Let's look at this important document that you and I live by. And you'll see that in section 3, we'll move into writing the Constitution. I did bring up one of the PowerPoints from Pete's PowerPoint station. And just a quick review. The articles were written in 1777 by John Dickinson, a Pennsylvania statesman, and adopted by Congress in 1781. The fear of having too much power in one person's hands reflects the experiences the colonies had under a monarchy. Remember, the word monarchy means rule by a king or queen. In the articles, the state governments limit the power of the National Congress. Congress had no power to raise taxes, no power to regulate foreign or state trade. Laws had to be approved by 9 out of 13 states, and Congress did not have the authority or power to enforce the laws. The strengths: the Treaty of Paris was signed during this time, which ended the Revolutionary War. The Northwest Ordinance was passed and had the power to declare war and peace, print money, make treaties, and settle state disputes. The Land Ordinance of 1785 stated that land in the West is to be surveyed using a grid system to establish 6-mile blocks. Those 6-mile blocks are known as counties or townships. And if you look on a map of Isabella County, each township is about 6 miles wide and 6 miles north and south. So 36 square miles. That is our average here. The Northwest Ordinance assisted in the orderly expansion of the United States, and it outlined a plan for applying for statehood for Western territories. 5,000 free males who own 50 acres can start governments. Population of 60,000 could become a state. So keep free males who own land. That largely limits the initial applicants to being how many white males with money, because not all white males own property. Some are too poor. And obviously free males limits it from any enslaved persons. The Northwest Ordinance, and you can see how it kind of runs here. And some of the elements of this era still exist. If you notice, there's a meridian road. That's the road from which they measured north and south, or east and west. And then baseline roads were where they would measure the north and south. Those are still remnants of this system. It promised no slavery, education, freedom of religion, and trial by jury. And you see the map of the Northwest Territory. And you're wondering, but Mr. I, we're not in the West. California's in the West. Yeah, well, keep in mind their country ended right here. And if you hear the University of Michigan fight song, they talk about the champions of the West, because we were the West at one time. Remember Shays' Rebellion? Farmers are required to pay debts in gold because they have no money because they were not paid during the war. Not a very good way to treat our veterans. And wealthy lawmakers invested their money in the war too and seek to get money from the farmers' debts. There's a lot to be said about that statement. Poor farmers are not represented in the Massachusetts legislature and cannot pass debt relief laws. The rebellion will free debtors from prisons and close courts that are hearing cases against farmers. The militia is called out to stop it, but poor farmers in 1791 elect officials who support their stance and will close courthouses and demand help from the Congress. Shays' Rebellion will prompt national leaders to create a stronger central government. And with that, at this point, you may now return to the Google Classroom to answer a few questions based on today's assignment and video. Hopefully, you come to our class now being able to compare the Declaration of Independence with the Articles of Confederation, and then we're going to move into the United States Constitution. Have a minute, Minwa, Bama P.